I got into comics when my mom and my dad would take me to the public library.
When I was in middle school, I would go to the library while I was waiting for my parents to pick me up. And in the comic aisle, they had dozens of paperbacks and, little single issues also.
Started off at the age of, I would say about 6, 7.
I had a friend who was a subscriber at the comic book store, and the owners of the store were selling, so he decided he wanted to buy it. At the time, I was under house arrest, so there was obviously not a lot going on in my life, so he came over, let me know that he bought the store and he wanted me to run it. I was under house arrest, I had nothing better to do, so I accepted.
I saw the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi. It was for my friend's 12th birthday.
I got into comic books by watching Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. After watching the movie, I decided to read the original works and the things that inspired the movie. My dad eventually took me to a local comic book store, and after that I kind of just fell in love with all the comic books.
I loved the movie so much, and it ended on such a cliffhanger for me that I did not want to wait the years it takes to make a movie. So I was just like, let me start reading the comic books so I can kind of satiate that curiosity of what happens next. So I started getting into the comic books, and I've been going down that rabbit hole ever since, and it's been a really cool journey.
I was about 4 or 5 years old. I used to stay at my grandparents' house. My uncle lived with them at that point. He was probably about 16, 17.
Well, my dad collected comic books since he was a little kid, and when I was old enough to read, he's like, hey, here, read this, you might like it, because he wanted that to be a bonding thing.
He worked for his girlfriend's dad over there at the comic book store, and he would bring home books all the time. And he had boxes and boxes of books. At that age, my grandmother would pull out books for me so I could start looking at them. I really didn't know how to read much, but I was looking at the pages, I was looking at the characters, the action sequences, and it's something that I fell in love with at that point.
Do I think people collect and read comics more for the writing or the art? That is a really great question. I'm going to be very biased, and I'm going to say a little bit more for the art.
It depends on the individual.
I think it depends on the person. I think when they collect, it depends on the person.
I think it's a combination of the two.
Depends on the person.
Comic books are such a visual medium, and the art does really just enrich the story. And of course, though, the writing very much guides the art, but I feel like the art is what really grabs you and pulls you in.
It's not necessarily a part of the writing or the art that people are drawn to. It's mostly the characters.
My favorite comic book character, I would say, has to be split between either Nightwing or Barry Allen, the Flash.
My favorite character in recent years has been Erica Slaughter from Something is Killing the Children. The story is really violent, and I can't really recommend it to everybody, but because of its brutal violence, it allows Erica to have a lot of really great moments that are brutal and badass in a way that you don't get out of typical comics like from Batman or Spider-Man.
Nightwing I fell in love with because I view myself as him completely when I was a child, especially because I was a child. I wanted to be Robin so bad. I viewed it as the coolest thing ever, minus the whole loss of parents thing.
Well, as a child, when I was growing up, my favorite superhero was Spider-Man, just like anybody else.
Nightwing was the one who kind of persevered the most, and that's what I loved the most about him. He was the most positive one, the most joyous one. I saw myself through him. When I was a kid, I made the costume with my dad from the Teen Titans show.
Then, as I got older, I think you start to understand how the world starts to work around you. And when you start to understand that, you start finding new heroes to connect with. And one of the heroes that I found that I connected with the most was John Constantine.
Another one was Barry Allen, the Flash. And the reason why I associate with him is just because he's just my favorite superhero in terms of he embodies everything I would want to be in a superhero. Nightwing is who I identify as, Barry Allen is who I'd want to be, if that makes sense.
I see myself in that character. I may not be able to do magician stuff, but the way he solves his way out of situations when he negotiates with otherworldly creatures, I always love that kind of stuff. Instead of just going out there saving lives, he fails all the time, but he always takes certain risks to succeed. And I always loved that in my characters.
well, he also perseveres, but it's very different. Like Naomi carries on a happy torch, and that's what's great about him. That's what I try to do. But every once in a while, when I don't feel that strong, I do identify more with Barry. In terms of like, even though he is sad and he can't overcome his feelings of being sad, he still pushes to do the right thing. Doing the right thing has almost always been at a great cost to him, and he still does it. Like, it's, at the end of the day, it's really tragic. It's very similar to Spider-Man, who I also love.
Like, a lot of people can relate to that character. They just don't know he exists because he's not pushed like the other characters, you know?
My favorite character, I'd say Batman mostly. Maybe it was Spider-Man when I was a little kid, but once I got older and got more into books, Batman became like the main superhero. I like more, but there's too many to name, but Batman is the one I have the most books for. It's gonna be like the same answer everybody gives. It's like, oh, he's more realistic, but that's not why I like him. I just like his whole dynamic. He's just a guy that, like, you know, his parents get shot in the alley, and instead of going to therapy like a regular person, he decides to spend his money to become the world's greatest detective and try and make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody else. His Rogues Gallery is like the best group of villains he's got. I mean, second probably to Spider-Man.
My favorite comic book character is without a doubt Spider-Man. Peter Parker, to me, the man, the myth, the legend. Without him, I don't think I'd be the man I am today.
So my favorite character is Spider-Man because this is a hard one.
I wouldn't be the man I am today without Spider-Man because I think when life hits you hard, it can be hard at times to keep going. And as I read Spider-Man as a young man, he goes through everything. He loses people he loves, people die because of him, and he really is honestly, it's a tragic story. But at the end of the day, he keeps doing the right thing, and he just keeps going forward.
I think he's a very compassionate and humane character. Right? He's a character that will make mistakes, but he will get back up and he will continue. He's a pretty inspiring character, and I hope to like have that sense of hope in my own life and see that in my families and friends too, because it's pretty cool. I definitely try to take what I get from Spider-Man into my job as a mental health counselor. It's really funny, actually. I take that so extreme. I have like a little Spider-Man figurine that I keep on my desk. And when things get really overwhelming or really heavy, I'll close my door and I'll just hold my little figurine. The phrase, with great power, there must also come great responsibility, always like spins through my mind when I'm working, because again, it was a lot of, you know, a lot of privilege and power to go to the school and get the degree and, you know, be able to get the good grades to get the job. So it is something I definitely want to make sure I am using that responsibly and doing right by my clients, no matter what's going on or how hard the day is or how many notes I have to write.
Growing up and reading comic books, I think it definitely had an impact on my character. Not only did it have an impact on me internally, but also externally. Growing up, a lot of people that I've grown up around usually didn't read it. Growing up, my dad was the only one that had read comic books. That was the only person I knew.
My dad ended up telling me I used to read Fantastic Four. And I was like, Dad, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Do you still have those books? He's like, no. And I'm like, aw. But he kind of like assumed that since I was like really into Barbies and all that stuff, I wouldn't be interested. But lo and behold, I was super into it.
Does your son read comics?
No, he doesn't. He reads manga. I tried to get him into comics, and the collection's his when I don't need him anymore or not around anymore.
But it's because it was a bonding experience with my dad, and that's kind of like it's like a internal thing. It's hard to describe.
It's just evolved. You know, he has friends in school now that like other things as well. They're into manga. They're into Dragon Ball, Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen. He comes in here and talks to the guys about things that I don't even know about.
We all like comic books, even if we don't like the same things. We come here, you know, to read these things. So when you find people that have the same interests, it creates that communal thing where, like, okay, you know, you can't talk to this with your parents mostly. You don't have a lot of friends that are into this stuff, so if you nerd out on them, they're going to be like, but you come here and you nerd out for 8 hours and no one's going to care.
And every week I pick up my books. I make sure that every week my file's always empty. And the guys, I get to see them all the time. Shane, Ron, who used to work here as well. Damien, that's been here forever as well. The guys already know me and they know what I like, and it's great to come see them. And a lot of the customers I see all the time, and we just hang out here for hours at times just talking.
So the way I met Sixto was when I started working here. The owner basically entrusted me right away to do a lot. So I was talking to one of the employees that was employed here under the previous owners, and I told him, I was like, "What are the biggest customers that the former owners lost?" Right, and one of the customers that came up was Sixto.
And Juan was asking Tom about customers that he loved, that he wished he could see again, and he mentioned me.
And I was like, "Oh, okay, so he spent a lot of money."
I came in one day, saw that there was new ownership, and Juan told Tom that I came in, and at that point I started my subscription all over again, and that's where I met Juan. And Juan and I pretty much hit it off at that point. So you like comics?
Beats being on house arrest.
And from there, our relationship just developed. We've known each other now for 10 years. I've gone through things. He's been there for me. I've been there for him. I think that's where comics are important to building relationships, because it gives you a cheat code, especially if you're socially awkward, if you're an introvert.
I think that the way that people congregate around comics is something that you don't really get out of like video games or even movies.
So my favorite aspect about comics that I can say to a T is the community that it brings together.
When it comes to comics, and picking up weekly comics, or even going to Barnes & Noble to pick up like a paperback or two, if you're in an aisle with something, in an aisle looking for something, and you come across someone who has like something similar or even something different that they're looking for, you can usually be able to relate to them over what they're interested in about comics, or the characters that they like. Because typically when people are that into comics, they're just as passionate about it as you are, and they're willing to talk about it.
There's one reason for you to be at a comic book store. So it's that icebreaker's built in.
It brings you all together. And there's nothing more fun than having a weird argument with someone saying that this character is more powerful than this character, this storyline sucked, well, I loved it because of this. Like, I love that camaraderie between people.
Growing up reading comic books, I typically didn't really have anyone to talk about it with. Majority of people my age didn't really read comic books. Luckily, I've met a couple people here at the store that also read comic books, and I've been able to become friends with them.
It just brings people from different walks of life together, and I love that about comics.
Basically, without comics, me and Sixto wouldn't have absolutely no relationship. I wouldn't know his son. He wouldn't know my family. So you could say that comics is the bridge that brought our families together.
I'm glad that I've met people, especially at conventions, that have the same interests in me. But it's definitely a small circle, but a strong circle. So you like comics?
I do, in fact, like comics.